time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely. Well, for a start, the only time that I've come back to the UK is...
Two brothers, one throne, and a silence between them so complete that even a personal plea, written by one prince directly to another, was refused before a single word of it could be spoken aloud. A locked door makes no sound. That is what makes it so devastating. It does not slam. It does not creak. It simply holds, silent and immovable, while the person on the other side slowly understands that no amount of knocking will change what has already been decided from within. That is precisely where Prince Harry finds himself tonight. Not pushed away in a moment of heated argument, not excluded during a public dispute that cameras could capture and commentators could dissect. He was refused quietly, formally, and with the full institutional weight of the British monarchy standing behind the man who made the call. Prince William, the future King of England, has overruled what sources close to the situation describe as Harry's most direct and personal appeal for reconciliation in years. And the palace is now confirmed, in language so deliberate it leaves no interpretive room, that there is no active reconciliation process underway. Those words are not diplomatic padding. In royal terms, they are a sealed verdict. To understand why this moment carries the weight it does, you have to step back from the headlines and look at the full architecture of what has broken down between these two brothers over the course of nearly a decade. This is not a story that began with a Netflix documentary or a memoir filled with uncomfortable revelations, though both of those chapters deepen the wound considerably. This fracture has roots that go further back, into private conversations behind palace walls, into arguments that were never meant to leave the room, and into a pattern of trust being extended, broken, and ultimately withdrawn in ways that left permanent marks on both men. Royal biographer Robert Lacey, who wrote the deeply researched account of the brothers' relationship in his book Battle of Brothers, described the deterioration between William and Harry as something that unfolded gradually before it collapsed spectacularly. Lacey, who has covered the royal family for decades, noted that the brothers had fundamentally different relationships with the institution they were born into. William saw the monarchy as something to be protected and served. Harry increasingly experienced it as something that had cost him more than it had given. That divergence in perspective did not stay abstract. It became personal. It became painful. And according to individuals familiar with the internal dynamics of the royal household, it eventually produced a confrontation during a private Windsor gathering following memorial service, the kind of event where grief is supposed to soften edges and remind people of what they share rather than what divides them. But that gathering did not soften anything. Instead, it became the moment that redrew the boundary between the two brothers in a way that would prove impossible to erase. Harry, carrying the accumulated weight of his departure from royal life, his resettlement in California, and the distance that had grown between him and the family he had grown up inside, arrived at that gathering looking for something more than condolence. He was looking for acknowledgement. He wanted the family to signal, even privately, that the road back had not been permanently closed. What he encountered instead was resistance. And at the center of that resistance stood his brother. William had arrived at his own conclusion long before that gathering took place. He had watched the years of interviews, the public disclosures, the carefully timed media moments, and emotional appeals made to the world rather than to the family itself. He had felt the private wounds become public property. He had watched Catherine's name be drawn into narratives she had never volunteered for, and he had made a decision that those close to him described as quiet but absolute. He would no longer allow the reconciliation conversation to be used as a mechanism that served one purpose publicly while producing damage privately. A source familiar with William's thinking, speaking to a correspondent for a major British publication, described the prince as someone who had reached what they called a point of institutional clarity. He was no longer approaching Harry's situation primarily as a brother navigating a painful family rupture. He was approaching it as the man who would one day wear the crown, and through that lens, every decision carried a different weight. The plea itself, when it arrived, was described by those with knowledge of it as genuine in its emotion and specific in its requests. Harry sought a private reconciliation meeting involving King Charles and senior family members. He wanted the kind of quiet, unrecorded, unannounced gathering that could allow real conversation to happen before any public signal was given. He also reportedly included a personal message directed specifically at William, not at Charles, not at the institution, but at his brother, a sentence that was never read aloud in the room where it was received. William declined to have it shared. He did not ask for it to be destroyed, but he refused to engage with it in a setting where it might soften the clarity of the decision he had already reached. That refusal to even hear the personal message told those present everything they needed to know about where William stood. This was not a man still weighing the options. This was a man who had already closed a chapter and was now simply making that closure official. The formal refusal that followed was described internally as measured, prepared, and final. There was no heated exchange reported in the room. There was no dramatic confrontation. William expressed his position with the kind of controlled precision that those who know him say he has developed specifically because he understands how quickly emotion can be weaponized when royal family dynamics are involved. He made clear that trust could not be rebuilt through timing, pressure, or the emotional logic of one carefully worded plea. He acknowledged that Harry's pain was real, without accepting that the pain created an obligation for the family to reset on terms that Harry defined. And he stated, with the kind of directness that left no interpretive room, that the palace would not be reopening the reconciliation process. What gives this particular refusal its historical weight is not just what was said, but who delivered it and under what circumstances. William is not yet king. Charles remains a sovereign, but multiple accounts from those familiar with the internal conversations suggest that in this specific matter, the future king carried the decisive voice. Charles, by all credible accounts, is exhausted by the years of pain, the public exposure, and the impossible position he has occupied between his two sons. Katie Nicholl, the royal editor of Vanity Fair and one of the most closely sourced royal correspondents writing today, has described Charles as a man deeply torn between the love he holds for both his sons and the institutional reality that the monarchy cannot continue absorbing the consequences of an unresolved family conflict played out in public. The king read the summary of Harry's request, understood what was asking, and ultimately did not overrule William's conclusion. That silence from the sovereign carried its own answer. Camilla, now queen consort, is reported to have sought softer language in the official confirmation, not out of disagreement with the substance of the decision, but out of a preference for wording that left the door technically unlatched even if it would never practically open. William declined even that. He understood something that softness would obscure. In the world of royal communication, a carefully chosen phrase that implies possibility is not kindness. It is an invitation for another cycle of hope, public pressure, and eventual disappointment. He chose language that was unmistakable instead, and the palace confirmed that position publicly with the statement that there is no active reconciliation process underway. The role of Catherine, Princess of Wales, in this entire episode is both subtle and central. She did not deliver the refusal. She did not sit in the meeting where the formal decision was made, but she was, in a way that those close to the situation understand clearly, at the heart of why the decision was made with the firmness it was. Harry's plea reportedly included a request for Catherine to be present at the proposed family meeting. Her presence, it was apparently reasoned, would signal something beyond mere family gathering. It would carry the weight of visible forgiveness, the kind of image that the world would read as unity restored. Catherine had already been through years of being drawn into royal narratives she had neither authored nor invited. She had watched her name become shorthand for a conflict she had been placed into rather than chosen. And William had seen what that cost her. When he reviewed Harry's request and saw that Catherine's presence was being factored into the symbolic architecture of a reconciliation gesture, he recognized it for what it was and refused to allow it to proceed. Senior royal correspondent Richard Kay, who has written extensively about the internal dynamics of the Windsor family across 3 decades, has noted that Catherine's influence on William is often described in terms of emotional steadiness rather than strategic direction. She does not, by most accounts, push William toward harder positions. She asks him whether he is certain. She ensures that decisions made under institutional pressure are also decisions that reflect the man beneath the title. When William told her privately what Harry's plea had contained, including the request for her presence, her reaction was not anger. It was a quiet understanding of why the answer had to be no, and that understanding gave William the kind of grounded confirmation he needed to hold a position without second-guessing himself. The moment the palace confirmation was delivered to Harry, the nature of what had happened fully registered. He had not simply been told to wait. He had not been offered a delayed pathway or a conditional future. He had been told, in the formal language of the institution he grew up inside, that the process he was hoping to engage was not happening. Those familiar with his reaction describe a silence that preceded anything else. The kind of stillness that arrives not when a person is calm, but when a person is trying to comprehend the full shape of something that still, on some level, believed might not come to pass. Meghan watched him receive the news and understood its layers beyond the personal. The public dimension of this refusal was enormous. Without any palace pathway toward reconciliation, every future absence, every missed event, every silence would be interpreted through the lens of this confirmation. The narrative had been set, and it had been set by Buckingham Palace in coordination with the future king. Harry reportedly asked whether King Charles had personally reviewed the wording. The answer he received confirmed that Charles had seen it, had understood its implications, and had allowed it to stand. This was not a decision made around the king. It was a decision made with the king's acquiescence, which in the logic of the royal household is the same as the king's approval. The person who drove the decision to its conclusion was William, but the person who had the authority to stop it and chose not to was Charles. That distinction matters, because it means Harry's separation from the palace is not the work of a single brother acting unilaterally. It reflects the collective position of the senior royal family as it now stands. The public reaction to the palace confirmation was immediate and divided in ways that accurately reflect the genuine complexity of the story. In Britain, where the monarchy remains a cultural institution that produces deeply personal responses, people reacted not just as observers of a news event, but as participants in a long-running story they have followed across decades. Tabloid front pages in London carried the kind of stark, declarative headlines that signal to editors and readers alike that a turning point has been reached. Headlines describing finality, closure, and the end of a reconciliation era were not journalistic embellishment. They were, in the assessment of those who cover the palace most closely, accurate characterizations of what the palace confirmation actually meant. Tom Sykes, who has written about the royal family for the Daily Beast and covered the Sussex situation since its earliest chapters, noted that this confirmation marks the first time the palace has used language as direct and final regarding the status of the relationship. Previous statements left room. This one did not. Among those who have followed Harry's trajectory since his departure from royal duties in 2020, there's a recognition that this moment represents something more than another chapter in a painful ongoing dispute. It represents the formal institutional conclusion of a question that has been left technically open for years, even as the practical answer was increasingly obvious to anyone paying close attention. Harry had maintained, through the various media engagements and interviews he has given since leaving the royal family, that he remained open to reconciliation and that the door on his end was not closed. What the palace has now confirmed is that while Harry's door may remain open, the door on the other side has been locked by the man who will one day be king, with the current king's silent but unambiguous consent. For William, the aftermath of the decision has not been one of visible relief or satisfaction. Those who have observed him in the days since describe a man who carries a decision with the kind of weight that comes from having done something necessary rather than something wanted. He did not refuse his brother out of cruelty. He refused him out of considered judgment that the family, the monarchy, and the people within it, including Catherine and their children, could not endure another cycle of private healing attempts that became public wounds. The prince is, by all serious accounts, a man of genuine emotional depth who feels the loss of what he and Harry once shared. What he has concluded is that feeling that loss does not create an obligation to keep reopening the door to more of it. Protection, he has determined, is also a form of love, and protecting the people within his care has become his governing priority. The deeper tragedy in this story, and it is a genuine one that deserves to be named clearly, is that both brothers could be understood without either being simply villainized. Harry carries wounds that are real, public, and documented. His experience of the royal family as an institution was shaped by the loss of his mother, by years of navigating an environment that is described as structurally incapable of providing the kind of emotional support he needed, and by a marriage that required him to choose between two different visions of his life. His plea for reconciliation was not the action of a manipulative figure trying to leverage family pain for public advantage. It was the action of a man who, regardless of everything that has happened, still as a father he loves, a brother he grew up alongside, and a family he was born into. The desire to find a way back to some version of that connection is entirely human and entirely understandable. William's refusal is equally understandable when viewed through the full lens of what the past several years have produced. He has watched the monarchy, an institution he will dedicate his life to serving, absorb wave after wave of public pressure generated by disclosures and narratives that originated within his own family. He has watched his wife be drawn into public disputes in ways that have had real costs for her dignity and her well-being. He has thought about his children and the world they will grow up in, and he has made a judgment that the pattern cannot continue. His refusal is not the absence of love for his brother. It is the presence of a responsibility he believes overrides that love in this particular moment, and in all the moments that would follow if he chose differently. Charles occupies perhaps the most painful position of all in this constellation of broken relationships. He is a father who loves both of his sons, and he has watched them become estranged in ways that no amount of institutional management has been able to repair. Royal biographer Penny Junor, whose work on the royal family spans multiple decades and is considered among the most authoritative accounts of the Windsor inner world, has written about Charles as a man of considerable emotional complexity who has often been better at understanding his own feelings and communicating them in ways that actually reach the people he cares about. His acceptance of William's decision in this matter is not, by credible accounts, a sign of indifference toward Harry. It is a recognition that he is no longer the person best positioned to fix what is broken, and that the future of the monarchy, the thing he spent his entire life preparing for and then inhabiting, cannot be sacrificed on the altar of reconciliation that may no longer be possible. The phrase the palace chose, no active reconciliation process, is worth examining word by word because royal language is never accidental. Active means current, ongoing, in motion. The palace is not saying that reconciliation is impossible in the abstract or that it has been ruled out in perpetuity. What it is saying is that right now, in the present tense, with the current state of trust between the parties as it stands, there is nothing moving. There is no channel open. There is no back channel being managed by aides. There is no quiet conversation being facilitated between senior advisors. There is nothing. And in the context of the past several years, during which multiple quiet attempts at rebuilding some form of connection have been made and have failed, nothing is as final a word as any palace communique can deliver for the British public. The confirmation lands as a kind of reluctant closure on a story that has generated more headlines, more emotional debate, and more genuine division of opinion than almost any domestic story of the past decade. The British people have not been unanimous in their response to Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life or their subsequent public commentary. Polls have consistently shown a complicated picture, with significant portions of the public expressing sympathy for Harry's stated experiences and equally significant portions expressing frustration with what they perceive as a continued public airing of private grievances. What the palace confirmation does is remove the possibility of a redemptive reunion narrative, the kind of moment that television loves and tabloids salivate over. When a family comes together, the wounds are publicly acknowledged and the story finds its resolution. That moment is not coming. William has ensured it. In the longer arc of royal history, this moment will likely be studied alongside other significant ruptures within the Windsor family, though it is distinct from them in important ways. The abdication of Edward VIII in 1936 was a constitutional crisis. The years of tension surrounding Diana, Princess of Wales, generated a different kind of institutional reckoning. What is happening between William and Harry is something the monarchy has rarely had to navigate with such full public visibility, a fracture between two brothers in direct line of succession that is played out not in private correspondence or quietly managed internal arrangements, but in interviews, memoirs, documentary films, and now formal palace statements. The institution has survived all of its previous ruptures. It will survive this one, but the cost is real, and the people paying are real, regardless of their titles. What Harry does now with this refusal is a question that will shape the next chapter of his public life. He has, in various interviews and public appearances, made clear that he does not wish to be permanently at war with his family. He has spoken about his love for his father, his hope for some form of future connection, and his belief that the door remains open from his side. The palace confirmation does not change Harry's feelings. What it changes is the structure of possibility. He can continue to hold the door open on his side of the relationship, and by most accounts he will, but without a corresponding willingness from the institution, and from William specifically to engage. An open door on one side of a lock wall is a complicated thing to navigate. Meghan will be watching this development with a clarity about its implications that is both personal and strategic. She has built a life and a public identity in the United States that does not depend on royal restoration. She has projects, platforms, and a public presence that stand on their own. But she also understands what Harry's relationship with his family means to him on a level that has nothing to do with titles or palace access. She has seen what estrangement costs him, and she will now watch to see whether the palace's formal confirmation of no reconciliation process produces in Harry a kind of liberation from continued hope, or whether it deepens a grief that comes from a wound this old and this personal. The monarchy, for its part, will continue. It always continues. That is the point of it, in William's view, and in the view of the people who have dedicated their professional lives to its preservation and functioning. The institution absorbs loss, manages rupture, and moves forward because moving forward is its primary function. Charles will carry his personal sadness as king. William will carry his personal loss as the future king. Catherine will continue to bring the steadiness that those around her consistently describe as one of the defining qualities she brings to every difficult moment. And Harry will carry his version of this story forward from California, with Meghan beside him and his children growing up at a distance from the family and the country he was born into. The door is not stuck. It is locked, and the key, by every credible account of what has transpired in recent days, is in William's possession. Whether he ever chooses to turn it again is a question that belongs entirely to the future, and to the private space between two brothers who once knew each other better than anyone, and who now navigate the distance between duty and blood with all the weight that carries. The palace has spoken. The refusal has been confirmed, and the reconciliation that so many hope might still be possible has been formally set aside by the man who will one day be king, in the presence of the man who already is. There is grief in that. There is weight in it. There is a particular sadness that comes from watching people who share blood and history and memory arrive at a place where the institution between them becomes larger than the love beneath it. That is where William and Harry stand tonight. And for now, the palace walls hold, the confirmation stands, and the silence where reconciliation once lived is the loudest thing of all. And so we arrive at the place this story was always heading, even when no one wanted to admit it. The palace confirmation did not create this ending. It simply named what had already become true over years of distance, disclosure, and damage that accumulated quietly until it could no longer be contained within the walls meant to hold it. William did not wake up one morning and decide to close the door on his brother. He arrived at that decision through a long and painful journey that cost him something real, something personal, something that no title and no future crown can fully replace. The brotherhood these two men shared was genuine once. It was the kind of closeness that people who knew them in their younger years described with particular warmth. Two boys who had lost their mother, who had navigated grief in public, who had found in each other the only other person in the world who truly understood what it meant to be them. That bond was real. The loss of it is real, and no institutional language, however carefully chosen, can make that loss feel small. William carries this decision not as a victory, but as a weight. Those who have observed him closely in the days since describe a man who moves with the particular heaviness of someone who has done what was necessary rather than what was wanted. He protected Catherine. He protected his children. He protected the monarchy he will one day lead. And in doing all that protecting, he accepted the cost of losing the last real thread of connection to the brother he grew up alongside. That is not a small thing to carry. It will not become smaller with time. It will simply become something he learns to carry differently, the way people learn to carry all losses that cannot be undone. Harry, across the ocean, now holds an answer he spent years hoping would never come in this form. He wanted one meeting, one private room, one honest conversation, without palace layers between his words and the people he needed to hear them. He did not get that. What he received instead was the formal confirmation that the institution had made its decision and that the decision was final. The grief in that is not lessened by the fact that some of what led here was of his own making. Grief does not require innocence. It only requires loss. And Harry has lost something that cannot be replaced by any public platform, any successful